Thanks for the upgrade, my dear Olivia. Daniel grinned as he strolled into the living room, tossing his sunglasses onto the coffee table like he owned the place. He stood there obnoxiously confident in his tailored suit and pristine new shoes, his designer luggage propped neatly beside him. Luxury logos peeked out from half-zipped compartments, brands I recognized instantly. First class to Europe. 5-star hotels, he continued smugly. This is the kind of life I've been missing. I stared at him for a moment, and then I laughed. It wasn't polite laughter. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was the kind that escaped before I could stop it, sharp and uncontrollable. Daniel's grin faltered. What's so funny? He snapped, his brows pulling together. Oh, Daniel, I said, shaking my head slowly. You have absolutely no idea what you've done. My name is Aaliyah, and I'm 34 years old. I work in cybersecurity. For the past 7 years, I've been married to a man who looked charming on the outside, but was a walking red flag underneath. Daniel had always been like this. Smooth. Confident. Full of big dreams and even bigger promises. He had a talent for making everything sound like a brilliant plan, even when it was reckless or unrealistic. Meanwhile, I was the one who made things actually work. I held down a stable career, while he bounced from one half-baked idea to the next. Startup dreams. Business opportunities. Temporary setbacks. I paid the bills. I covered the gaps. I told myself we were a team. I ignored the warning signs. The financial secrecy. The vague explanations about missing money. The constant excuses for why he still wasn't contributing. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to believe in us. But at 2 a.m. last week, Daniel made a mistake he couldn't charm his way out of. I'd been asleep upstairs when it happened. Or at least, that's what he thought. My work in cybersecurity had trained me to notice patterns, digital footprints, anomalies, suspicious behavior. But I never imagined I'd need those skills inside my own home. That night, Daniel waited until he was sure I was fast asleep. Then he crept downstairs and opened my laptop. He knew my passwords. I trusted him. He accessed one of my credit cards, copied down the details, took photos with his phone, and quietly slipped back into bed like nothing had happened. The next morning, I was sipping coffee when my phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. I opened my banking app, and my stomach dropped. Nearly $50,000 in charges. Designer clothing. Luxury watches. First-class flights to Paris. The truth clicked into place instantly. Daniel. Of course it was him. But instead of panicking, something unexpected happened. I smiled. The card he'd used wasn't my personal account. It was a dummy credit card, one tied to a cybersecurity training program I run at work. It exists for one purpose only: to teach companies how to detect fraud in real time. Every transaction triggers alerts. Every alert goes straight to the authorities. Daniel didn't just steal from me. He turned himself into a live fraud case study. That same morning, I called my lawyer, Farah. You're not going to believe this, I said, walking her through everything. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then laughter. Wait, she said between chuckles. Let me get this straight. He stole a dummy card. The one linked to fraud detection. Exactly, I replied, calm but deeply satisfied. Oh my God, Farah laughed. Every charge he makes is being flagged. He thought he was being clever, I said. Farah snorted. Clever? He just handed the authorities a gift-wrapped case. For the rest of the week, I stayed quiet. I watched. And I waited. Living large on stolen money, for the rest of that week, I said nothing. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't question him. I didn't even hint that I knew what he'd done. Instead, I played my role perfectly, calm, distracted, almost indifferent. Inside, though, I was watching everything unfold in real time. 2 days after the charges first appeared, Daniel left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up. I stared at the note for a long moment, then let out a soft laugh. I knew exactly what that meant. He was gone. And he was spending my stolen money. That night, as I sat on the couch with my laptop open, the fraud alerts started rolling in again. High-end restaurants. Luxury boutiques. 5-star hotels. Each notification chimed like a countdown clock. Paris. Of course he'd chosen Paris. Daniel had always loved the image of being someone important, someone admired. The kind of man who drank champagne on rooftops and wore designer watches like they were disposable. Every purchase he made was logged. Every location recorded. Every transaction flagged. And he had no idea. While Daniel posted carefully cropped photos on social media, expensive dinners, polished hotel mirrors, champagne glasses catching the light, I watched the back-end data tell the real story. Time. Amount. Merchant. Confirmation. 3 days into his spree, my phone rang. Ms. Brooks, a calm voice asked. Yes. This is Agent Raymond, a federal investigator. We've identified significant fraudulent activity tied to one of your accounts. Do you know who might be responsible? I didn't hesitate. My husband, I said. There was a brief pause on the line. Your husband? I explained everything, the dummy card, the training program, my work in cybersecurity. Agent Raymond let out a low whistle. That's a new one, he said. You'll need to provide a formal statement, but based on what we've already flagged, he's in serious trouble. Understood, I replied. We'll continue monitoring activity, he added. The more he spends, the clearer the case becomes. After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair, heart steady, mind clear. Daniel was digging his own grave. Every night, more alerts appeared. A luxury watch store. A private shopping experience. A Michelin star restaurant. Each charge felt like a quiet victory. Meanwhile, Daniel sent the occasional text, casual, careless. Paris is insane. Wish you were here. You'd love this place. I never replied. By the end of the week, I knew exactly when his flight home would land. Agent Raymond had already confirmed that everything was in place. All you have to do, he'd said during our last call, is let him walk back into his life like nothing's wrong. Let him feel safe. The night Daniel returned, I made dinner like normal. The apartment was clean, calm, unchanged. The front door swung open, and there he was. Daniel walked in like a king returning from conquest, designer duffel bag slung over his shoulder, confidence practically radiating off him. Thanks for the upgrade, he said again, grinning. You really outdid yourself this time. I laughed. I couldn't stop myself. Daniel froze. What's so funny? He asked sharply. Oh, Daniel, I said softly. You're about to find out. He dropped his bag onto the floor with a smug thud. Seriously though, Olivia, he continued, shrugging off his jacket. You should have told me about that card ages ago. Imagine how much fun we could have had. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. And how exactly did you think this would end? He smirked. You're always so uptight about money. It's not like you couldn't afford it. I figured you'd get over it once you saw how happy it made me. The audacity would have been infuriating, if it weren't so pathetic. I bit back another laugh. So the watches, the flights, the hotels, I said evenly. You thought all of that was just a gift from me? Not thought, he said, pointing at himself. Knew? I smiled, tight-lipped, unreadable. A few minutes later, Daniel disappeared into the shower, humming loudly, completely unaware that every word he'd said was already another nail in his coffin. As the water ran, I picked up my phone and texted Farah. He's back. Ready to move forward. Her reply came instantly. Perfect. I'll alert Agent Raymond. I set the phone down and listened to Daniel sing off-key from the bathroom. For the first time in years, I felt calm. The perfect confession. Daniel came out of the bathroom wrapped in a plush white towel, his hair damp, his face glowing with the confidence of someone who thought he'd just gotten away with everything. You should have seen Paris, he said, flopping onto the couch like he didn't have a care in the world. The shops, the restaurants, it was unreal. I leaned casually against the doorway, keeping my expression neutral. Sounds incredible, I said. Tell me more. That was all the invitation he needed. Daniel launched into a detailed account of his week-long spree, hands moving animatedly as he talked. He described rooftop bars, private tastings, luxury boutiques that only let special clients inside. Every sentence dripped with pride. And every word was evidence. What he didn't know was that my phone was recording the entire conversation, tucked neatly beside my hand. Farah had suggested it, carefully, legally, within our state's consent laws. Best part? Daniel said, holding up a gold watch that caught the light. Nobody suspected a thing. Not even you. I nodded, playing along. That must have felt empowering. He laughed. Finally living the life I deserve. I smiled faintly, knowing that the more he talked, the worse it got for him. When he finally ran out of stories, Daniel leaned back, completely satisfied with himself. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed, and he frowned. Bank notifications are acting weird, he muttered. Probably just travel stuff. I said nothing. The next morning, I met Farah for coffee. He has no defense, she said, scrolling through the compiled evidence. Fraud alerts, transaction logs, locations, timestamps, and now a recorded confession. What happens next? I asked. Agent Raymond is ready, she replied. They are coordinating with local police. Once you give the word, they'll bring him in for questioning. I nodded. Tonight. Farah smiled. Good. Let him walk straight into it. Back home, Daniel spent the day lounging around, wearing his stolen luxury-like armor. He bragged about returning items he didn't like, talked about future trips, even joked about upgrading our apartment. I watched him quietly, marveling at how confident ignorance could make someone. That evening, as Daniel scrolled through his phone on the couch, there was a knock at the door. My heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. I stood up and walked calmly toward the door, opening it to find Agent Raymond and two uniformed officers standing on the porch. Good evening, Ms. Brooks, Agent Raymond said professionally. Is Daniel home? He's right inside, I replied, stepping aside. Please come in. Daniel looked up, confused. What's going on? He asked, sitting straighter. Agent Raymond approached him with calm authority. Daniel Brooks, you're under investigation for multiple counts of credit card fraud and unauthorized use of a financial account. We'd like you to come with us for questioning. Daniel's face drained of color. What? No, this is a mistake, he stammered, turning to me. Aaliyah, tell them. This is crazy. I crossed my arms. I don't know, Daniel. You've been awfully busy lately. As the officers read him his rights, he protested louder. You can't do this. You're my wife, you're supposed to stand by me. I tilted my head slightly. Funny. I thought husbands weren't supposed to steal from their wives. The officers guided him toward the door, his bravado collapsing into desperation. You won't get away with this, he hissed. I smiled. Oh, Daniel. I already have. The door shut behind them with a sharp click. The apartment fell silent. I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where he'd been just minutes earlier. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. Relief. An hour later, Farah called. They've started questioning him, she said. He's already trying to spin the story. Of course he is, I replied. He's claiming you gave him permission, she added dryly. But don't worry, between the alerts and your recording, he doesn't stand a chance. The next morning, Agent Raymond called with an update. We have everything we need, he said. Your husband admitted to using the card, but claims he didn't know it was tied to fraud detection. That sounds like him, I said. We are moving forward with charges, he continued. You're not liable for a cent. All fraudulent purchases are being reversed. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Thank you, I said quietly. This case handed itself to us, Agent Raymond replied. You handled it brilliantly. I ended the call and looked around the apartment. For the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me. The fallout hit Daniel faster and harder than I expected. By the next morning, the designer confidence he'd worn like a second skin had evaporated. Word spread quickly among our mutual friends and acquaintances. Arrests had a way of doing that, especially when they involved fraud, luxury spending, and a man who'd built his entire identity around charm and appearances. People talked. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into quiet judgment. The image Daniel had carefully cultivated, the carefree husband, the ambitious dreamer, began to crumble almost overnight. His phone rang constantly, but not with support. Some friends stopped calling altogether. Others reached out cautiously, as if afraid that association alone might taint them. A few asked me directly what had happened. I told them the truth. Not angrily. Not emotionally. Just facts. And facts were enough. The designer goods Daniel had flaunted so proudly were confiscated. The luxury watch he'd shown off on the couch was logged as evidence. The flights he'd booked were cancelled, and the hotels refunded. His accounts were frozen pending investigation. The life he'd stolen collapsed in a matter of days. One afternoon, Farah called with an update. He's trying to negotiate, she said. Claiming it was all a misunderstanding. I almost laughed. Let me guess, he says I gave him permission. Exactly. What's his legal position? I asked. Bad, she replied bluntly. Multiple charges. Significant amount of money. This isn't something charm can fix. That evening, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Aaliyah, Daniel's voice came through, low and strained. I need to talk to you. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. The only person you need to talk to is your lawyer. Please, he said, desperation creeping in. I messed up. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Didn't mean to steal $50,000 from me. I asked calmly. Didn't mean to book flights, hotels, and shopping sprees and hope I wouldn't notice. There was silence on the line. I thought you loved me, he finally muttered. The words hit, but not the way they used to. I did, I said. I loved the person I thought you were. But the man who lied to me, stole from me, and thought he'd get away with it. That's not someone I could ever love. He didn't respond. I hung up. A week later, Farah called again. He accepted a plea deal, she said. He's avoiding jail time, but he'll have to repay every cent and complete community service. His credit is ruined. That seems fair, I replied. Farah laughed softly. You're handling this better than most. Later that night, I sat alone in the apartment, a glass of wine in hand. The silence no longer felt heavy, it felt peaceful. 4 years, I believed Daniel was the one holding our marriage together. That his ambition and charm were what kept us moving forward. Now I saw the truth. I had been the foundation. He was just standing on it. The day the divorce papers arrived, I didn't cry. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat on the couch, reading the words finalized and irrevocable over and over again. Daniel's absence wasn't a loss. It was a gift. The apartment felt different, lighter, quieter, freer. His things were gone, whatever he hadn't sold or stuffed into his designer bag. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling like I was carrying someone else's weight. A few days later, my friend Heine came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. And to walking away from dumpster fires, I added, clinking my glass against hers. We laughed, real laughter. That night, after Heine left, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. I thought about the moment Daniel had walked through the door, flaunting stolen luxury, convinced he'd upgraded his life. He'd been so sure of himself. So certain. And now, he was the one paying the price. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Rebuilding the days after Daniel's arrest passed quietly, almost gently. There was no dramatic aftermath, no lingering chaos. Just space, physical and emotional, where tension used to live. The apartment felt different without him. Lighter. Like something heavy had been lifted and carried away for good. I didn't miss the sound of his keys at the door, or the way his presence filled every room with restless energy. What I noticed instead was peace. Real peace. The kind I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Farah stopped by one afternoon to drop off the final paperwork. She sat across from me on the couch, flipping through the documents with her usual efficient calm. How are you holding up? She asked. Better than I expected, I admitted, handing her a cup of coffee. I don't even feel angry anymore. Just relieved. She smiled knowingly. That's because you already won. We went through the paperwork together, finalizing the details of Daniel's financial restitution. He would be paying back every cent. Not because I needed the money, but because accountability mattered. When Farah left, I sat alone at the kitchen table, looking around the apartment. 4 years, I'd let Daniel dictate the terms of our relationship, because I thought compromise was love. I thought staying quiet was strength. Now I knew better. Peace built on silence wasn't peace at all. A week later, the official divorce letter arrived. The envelope was thin and unassuming, far too small to carry something so life-changing. I held it in my hands for a long moment before opening it. Finalized. Irrevocable. The words felt surreal, but grounding. This wasn't the future I'd imagined when I married Daniel. I'd pictured partnership, stability, shared growth. Instead, I'd been carrying us both while he took advantage of my trust. Still, as I sat there, I realized I hadn't lost anything worth keeping. That evening, Heine came over again, this time with my favorite takeout and a second bottle of wine. To freedom, she said, raising her glass. To never settling, I replied. Over the next few weeks, I began rebuilding, not just my space, but myself. I redecorated the apartment, adding color and warmth in places Daniel had always dismissed as unnecessary. Soft blues, warm lighting, framed photos from trips I'd taken before I ever met him. Every change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I finally took the solo vacation I'd been dreaming about for years. Just a quiet coastal town, long walks by the water, and mornings that belonged entirely to me. No compromises. No explanations. Daniel tried reaching out, through mutual acquaintances, vague emails, even a poorly written letter claiming he'd changed. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Occasionally, updates filtered through the grapevine. Daniel was struggling to find work. His reputation was damaged, his finances in ruins. He'd moved back in with his parents, still clinging to the belief that charm could fix anything. I didn't feel sorry for him. I felt free. One morning, a month after everything was finalized, I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the city wake up. Sunlight streamed into the living room, catching on the fresh coat of blue paint I'd chosen. The apartment didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like home. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. Walking away wasn't failure. It was survival. It was choosing myself. That weekend, Heiner and I met for brunch, a new ritual we'd started. Over mimosas and waffles, she asked, "So, what's next for you?" I smiled, feeling calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. "I'm focusing on myself. Work's going great. I might take a longer vacation, somewhere quiet. Maybe the mountains." She raised her glass. "You deserve it." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. No looking back. Every now and then, despite my silence, Daniel tried to resurface. It started with messages passed through mutual acquaintances, awkward apologies wrapped in excuses. "He's really sorry. He knows he messed up. He just wants closure." I declined every attempt. Then came the emails. Long, rambling paragraphs filled with self-pity and vague promises of change. He wrote about how hard things had become, how misunderstood he felt, how none of it had been his intention. The words felt hollow, more focused on his suffering than the damage he'd caused. I read one email halfway through before closing it. The rest I deleted without opening. Closure, I'd learned, didn't come from the person who hurt you. It came from deciding you were done listening. Through friends, I heard pieces of Daniel's new reality. He was struggling to keep a job, bouncing from one low-paying position to the next. Employers didn't trust him once they ran background checks. His credit was destroyed. The lifestyle he'd chased had turned into a constant reminder of what he'd lost. The designer suits were gone. The luxury trips were a memory. The charm no longer worked. I didn't dwell on it. He wasn't my responsibility anymore. One evening, as I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar email address appeared on the screen. I already knew it was him. Curiosity got the better of me. This one was different. Shorter. Quieter. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought I could fix everything. I was wrong." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need it. That night, I reflected on everything I'd been through. The betrayal. The humiliation. The slow realization that I'd been carrying a marriage on my own for years. Daniel's actions had forced me to confront a hard truth. I'd been sacrificing myself to keep something broken alive. And walking away had been the bravest thing I'd ever done. A few weeks later, I heard Daniel had officially started his community service. I imagined him there, stripped of pretense, surrounded by consequences he couldn't charm away. For the first time, I didn't feel anything at all. No anger. No sadness. No satisfaction. Just distance. My life, meanwhile, was settling into a rhythm that felt entirely my own. Work was thriving. I'd been invited to lead a new cybersecurity initiative, one that felt both challenging and meaningful. For years, I'd poured my energy into stability. Now, I was pouring it into growth. I spent my evenings doing things I loved, reading on the couch, cooking meals Daniel had always complained about, sitting in silence without feeling lonely. Silence, I realized, wasn't empty. It was peaceful. One afternoon, Heine called. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I've never seen you this grounded." "I feel lighter," I replied. "Like I finally stopped apologizing for existing." She laughed. "That'll do it." I started journaling again, something I'd given up years ago. Writing helped me untangle the past, but more importantly, it helped me imagine the future without fear. I wasn't rebuilding from ruins. I was building from clarity. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances still mentioned Daniel, usually in hushed tones. He was trying to rebuild his image, trying to explain himself. I let them talk. Their stories no longer had any power over me. One quiet Sunday morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, I realized something profound. I hadn't checked his social media in weeks. I hadn't wondered what he was doing. I hadn't replayed old conversations in my head. I was free, not because he was gone, but because I had finally let go. That realization settled deep in my chest, steady and reassuring. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast, to boundaries, to growth, to choosing myself without guilt. There was only one chapter left to close. And this time, it wouldn't involve him at all. Starting over, the morning sun spilled into the apartment, soft and golden, as I stood by the window with a warm cup of coffee in my hands. The city below was waking up, cars moving, people rushing, life continuing. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt completely at peace watching it all unfold. The apartment no longer felt like a place I was surviving in. It felt like home. Everything around me reflected who I was now. The fresh paint on the walls. The carefully chosen furniture. The quiet corners filled with books, plants, and light. Nothing here reminded me of Daniel anymore, and that felt like freedom. A few weeks earlier, the last legal confirmation had arrived. Everything was finalized. No loose ends. No unfinished conversations. Just a clean break. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. One evening, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, the city lights stretching endlessly before me. I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. Betrayal had cracked my world open, but what emerged wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. I understood something now that I hadn't before. Love shouldn't require you to shrink yourself. Commitment shouldn't mean carrying someone else's weight alone. And loyalty should never come at the cost of your dignity. Daniel's betrayal hadn't destroyed me. It had revealed me. I thought about the woman I'd been at the beginning of all this, patient, forgiving, constantly explaining away someone else's behavior. She wasn't weak. She'd just been hopeful. But hope without boundaries had nearly cost me everything. Now, I had boundaries. And I had myself. Heine came over that night, as she often did now. We sat together, laughing, talking about small things, work gossip, travel ideas, new routines. "You seem different," she said at one point. "Not happier exactly, stronger." I smiled. Because I am. Strength didn't come from revenge or winning. It came from choosing not to go back. Over the following months, my life continued to expand in quiet, meaningful ways. I traveled more, alone, and without guilt. I took risks at work, trusted my instincts, and stopped asking for permission to exist the way I wanted to. Occasionally, I'd hear about Daniel. He was still struggling. Still blaming circumstances. still searching for shortcuts. But his story no longer intersected with mine. I didn't feel anger when I thought of him. I felt gratitude. His actions had forced me to confront my own worth, to stop settling, to step into a life that belonged fully to me. One night, as I stood on the balcony again, I raised my glass toward the city lights. "Here's to me," I said softly. "Here's to walking away when staying would have meant losing myself. Here's to starting over, not from nothing, but from experience, strength, and self-respect." This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a life I could finally call my own.